Hey everybody, this is John from /bash, and today I am bringing you another proRevenge Reddit video. If you are new to the channel, then subscribe and ring that notifications bell so you don't miss out on the fun. In our first story, won't reimburse my expenses? I'll get you fired. Let's jump right in. I was working a job that had me operating in one of our overseas offices. We would have business expenses, and those receipts would be in the language of the country we were in, obviously. Those expenses were for things like printer ink, office equipment, cleaning services, marketing costs, all pretty standard stuff. Well, around this time, we got a new VP over our region who worked out of the head office in LA. This VP came up with this brilliant idea to hire a translator to translate all of our receipts to make sure we weren't sneaking in BS. Fair enough. However, the issue that arose was that we had to send our expenses to the translator who would translate the receipt, then submit for reimbursement. The problem was this translator was a real Karen type. She would demand better scans of the receipts, oftentimes after we had already thrown it away. She would argue if we really got the best deal on whatever we bought. I remember in one transaction on about $200 of ink cartridges, she asked me why I didn't order online from this common website, to which I said they were out of stock at the time and we needed the ink so we bought from a local store. To which she said I was spending too much money. To which I said, it's none of your concern, your job is to translate the receipt. To which she said if I wanted her to submit my expenses, I needed to be nice to her. To which I said she needs to learn her place, she's a translator, not a VP that gets to instruct me on what to do. After this encounter, she started being extra anal with my expenses, so one day I came into the office early to call her and try to work things out. She basically told me that I screwed up by pissing her off, and she expected my expense reports to be perfect, or she wouldn't submit them unless they were. I told her if she keeps this up, she won't have a job much longer. She laughed and wished me well and hung up. A few months later, we had our annual meeting in LA, and after the meeting, we were at a bar and I walked up to our VP and started up a conversation. I steered the conversation to expenses and I asked him how much in monthly expenses did he typically reimburse us for in the country we worked out of. He said about $3,000 to $4,000. I acted surprised and asked, "Is that all?" He goes, "Yeah." To clarify, that $3,000 to $4,000 is the typical spend, and he says, yeah, it rarely gets above $4,000. So I ask him about how Karen, our translator, is doing. He says she's doing a good job, and I nod my head and I go, how much fraudulent expenses has she caught? It's important to note every employee that was submitting expenses was well paid. They'd be awfully stupid trying to skim some extra dollars via fraudulent expense reports. He goes, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, you hired her to ensure all the expenses you were reimbursing us for are legitimate, right? Her job is to translate them for you, correct?" He says it is, and I ask, "So, is it safe to presume you've done that to ensure people aren't submitting BS expenses?" He says, "You could say that." I smile and ask, "So how much in fraudulent expenses has she caught?" He thinks for a moment and goes, "I don't think she has caught any." So I ask, "And how much do we pay her?" He says it depends on her workload, but between $2,500 to $3,000 a month. I smile and ask, "Does it make sense to pay someone $3,000 a month to translate $3,000 in receipts?" "Well, she ensures we aren't getting fraudulent expenses." And I counter, "Well, you said she hasn't caught any in the last 9 months, and the expenses are always between $3,000 and $4,000, so as long as the expenses stay in that range, wouldn't it be safe to assume that the expenses are legitimate? And couldn't you bring on a translator on a contract basis if they got out of hand?" He sees my point, and imagine the cost savings. We would probably save over $40,000 a year. That's a good chunk of change, isn't it? The VP tries to defend his position, "But she does a good job," and I counter, "But you could frame this as you've saved us $40,000 a year and created a baseline to judge expenses by. Cutting cost is always good for the bottom line and the end of the year bonuses, isn't it?" For your information, I knew that a major percentage of a VP comp package with the company had to do with the company's margin at the end of the year. The bigger the margin, the bigger the bonus. You can see the twinkle in his eye. We carry on the rest of the night. A few weeks later, we get an email from the VP saying that we are to submit all our expenses directly to the admin for reimbursement and that we have let go of Karen. Story 2. I do the work, but you don't pay? Well, I am going to get the money out of you somehow. A few years after I started my business, I was asked to clean up and optimize a number of PCs in multiple locations, as well as set up some forms and templates for a new client who owned a local restaurant. The work, all labor apart from a little travel, was performed over the space of a month due to scheduling conflicts and school holidays, but on completing the last of it, the client confirmed verbally that he was happy with all I'd done and to go ahead and send an invoice. I duly emailed an invoice for a sum just in excess of £400. I waited for payment, never heard anything, sent reminder emails, called and left messages, but no response. Eventually, a couple of busy months had passed and I met the client by chance in the local supermarket. On asking why he had not paid or been in touch, he said that all the PCs were as bad as they had been before I'd started and that he had tried to contact me with no success. As my landline and mobile phone had color display as well as answering services, and there had been no emails, I knew the latter was BS, and as any PC user knows, a system can easily go back to pot if the user's bad habits don't change. So I contacted a local debt collector, gave him the details, printouts of my call logs and post-invoicing emails, and he took them to the restaurateur. On his return, his words were, "He's not disputing the invoice, he's saying that the work wasn't done right, so it's his word against yours." I asked if it was worth taking the guy to small claims. The debt collector said even if you could prove he confirmed he was satisfied with the work, they might insist you get his computers back to their pre-invoice state again. Do you really want to spend more time doing that? Of course, the answer was no, so I stewed over in my mind and came up with a plan. At this point, it was late November, so creating 2 throwaway email accounts and female names, I got in touch with the restaurant to book a large party for Valentine's night the following February. I put it down as my husband's surprise 40th birthday party, confirmed that my husband's sister, and CC'd her in the message with the other throwaway, couldn't make the journey north, but would happily pay the £10 per head deposit as her share towards the night. Of course, as time went on, the ideas grew arms and legs. The numbers attending increased until the owner suggested he'd reserve the whole restaurant for the evening. They'd happily arranged the seating to suit us, but could I ensure the deposit was sorted ASAP, please? Of course, I confirmed that the sister was a scatterbrain and that I'd ensure the check was with him very soon. He emailed the sister using the CC address and she confirmed it had been posted. To keep him on side, I asked for a proposed menu in advance so that I could send it to all the attendees for pre-ordering. Naturally, they were delighted that they'd know this as it makes their life much easier. Consequently, the numbers for all 3 courses were emailed in, with a few fussy eater variables thrown in for good measure. Needless to say, by the beginning of February, he was getting quite antsy about there being no sign of the deposit. But I assured him that the sister's check must have been lost in the post, so she'd send another by special delivery if they could ensure someone was there to sign for it. I knew the owner lived about 25 miles away and the restaurant didn't open till 5 p.m., so he'd have to come in very early and hang around waiting for it. A week before D-Day, and he'd obviously had enough. He emailed in a spat saying they'd turned away numerous inquiries, had no deposit, and could no longer hold back on taking other bookings. This time I didn't bother replying. My part was done. My wife at the time and I were booked in at another restaurant close by for our own Valentine's meal, after which we took a walk past the restaurateur's business premises to see just 2 cars in their parking lot, one of which was his. I'm not sure how much he must have lost out on that night, but knowing his prices, I'd bet it was significantly more than the £400 I'd invoiced him. Of course, Lessons were learned by me too. Get written or emailed confirmation of job satisfaction for one, and not letting new clients go unbilled for too long was another. Naturally, I had no hesitation letting all and sundry know how he'd behaved either, so he was blacklisted, or forced to pay up front for any work by IT and any other professionals I knew locally. This is John from /bash. Please hit that like button to help with the almighty YouTube algorithm and subscribe if you're new. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one.